Traders, how are you? Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy, co-founder of Speed Up Trader, where you guys can come and apply to trade our money live for just the process of 120 bucks. We have accounts starting at $25,000. Today we're going to be doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Overall, this week, the U.S. main indices fell on Monday due to lackluster results from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, pressured a lot by the financial stocks as well. Finally pulled back from a rally that we had last Friday. So not, for example, the 19th of April, but the 12th, Friday of last week, right? Not last week, the week before. So we had a big rally on Friday. Then on Monday in the markets this last week, markets came down due to that pressure, almost reached the record high. If you guys remember, if I'm not mistaken, last week we had what was called the golden cross and a lot of the indices, which indicated short-term up potential. I told you guys that we had the expectation that it was going to go up, possibly reaching an all-time high. Now you guys can see that we're starting to approach that, but long-term, we're not going to continue to go up that much, at least not go up like we were before when the market was just skyrocketing to the upside. On Tuesday, we had stellar results from the healthcare giant Johnson & Johnson and a lot of the technology stocks that helped the markets on Tuesday. The benchmark S&P 500 was about 1% away from the all-time high on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ reached 2019 all-time highs. They hit 2019 highs. The S&P 500 this year, 2019, is up 15.82%. The NASDAQ this year, 20.02%. And as of Thursday as well, these are all as of Thursday numbers, 18th of April, the Dow Jones is up 13.86% this year. Bridgewater Associates, which is the world's largest hedge fund, saying that major drivers of the U.S. corporate profit margins are unsustainable and are now under threat, which in turn signifies that we're going to have lower equity prices eventually. U.S. indices for the week, the Dow is up 0.56%, the S&P 500 went down 0.08%, and the NASDAQ went up 0.18%. In overseas market news, global shares erased this week's gains on Thursday after we had manufacturing surveys from Asia and Europe, weak manufacturing surveys. That obviously started all of the fears about the overall health of the economy globally. For the week, the European markets generally are higher, with the DAX from Frankfurt, Germany up 1.85%. Latin American and Canadian markets, the biggest winner is the Argentinian Merval at 2.20%. African and Middle Eastern markets, the largest economy in Africa, which is Nigeria, had the best returns this week at 1.76%. And the markets in Asia were mostly mixed, with the SEC in China up 2.57%, and the South Korean Kospi was down the biggest at 0.86. Overall this week, Bitcoin has had a few weeks in a row with good results. It went up 3.84% to 5,263.86. And in financial news, since the financial crisis, the U.S. corporate debt has more than doubled. Not a good stat. So it's sitting at more than $9 trillion, which is nearly 50% of US GDP. So remember the triple whammy that I told you guys about before. Personal debt, record high. Corporate debt, record high. Government debt, record high. The government debt in the US is approaching or right around 100%. I haven't looked at the numbers, so don't quote me on that. So the federal debt, not including unfunded liabilities, is already in or around 100%. Just on top of that, the corporate debt, we're now at 150, just those two. Can you imagine? I mean, having debt, just think about it in a personal finance situation. If you guys make $50,000 and you have $50,000 worth of debt, or in this scenario, $150,000 worth of debt, it can't be sustained long term. This is not good at all. The ratio of corporate debt to US GDP rose 40% prior to each of the last 3 US recessions, so that's another indication that there's a problem. Bank of Japan is among the top 10 shareholders of Tokyo-listed companies at 49.7%. They're expecting in 2020 that it's going to overtake the state-run pension fund as a top shareholder. Overall, they have 4.7% of the total market cap, and an equity of about $250 billion. In my opinion, never a good sign when the government is controlling that much stuff, because, you know, they always do the right thing. In commodities, U.S. crude is up 0.33% at $64. International crude, which is called Brent, went up 0.66% at $71.97. President Maduro is now funneling cash flow from the Venezuelan oil sales through Rosneft, which is the state-run oil company of Russia. They're trying to evade the U.S. sanctions that were placed on them because the U.S. wants to remove Maduro from power. Gold this week went down 1.14% to $12.76. Silver went up 0.13% to $15.08. And Venezuela sold about $400 million in gold despite the international push to freeze the country's assets. It's almost 9 tons, and their assets, let's say, their reserves, the central bank's reserve of Venezuela fell from $8.6 billion on the 12th of April to about 5.1 billion. The total central bank reserves went down to 8.6 billion, and of that, 5.1 billion of that is gold. In Canada, in Alberta, which is the main oil producing province in Canada, they elected a right-leaning pro-energy party. They won by a landslide, which is a very bad sign for Trudeau, which is obviously in a very bad situation with the scandal that has been happening. He's due for federal elections in October. Indonesian President Joko Widodo won a second term based on unofficial counts and also despite objections of a rival. In the economy, the Brazilian economic activity contracted in February for the most in 9 months. It adds concerns about a sluggish start to 2019 and puts a lot of pressure on the new President Bolsonaro to help to reignite an economic recovery. Not going to be great in a few years from now, isn't it? President Bolsonaro and the things that are going to happen. Mortgage Bankers Association, the applications to U.S. lenders seeking loans to buy a home climbed to their highest level in almost 9 years last week, even though mortgage rates are increasing. Not a good sign, because at the end of the day, the economy isn't doing as well as everybody says it is. The Atlanta Federal Reserve is saying that the U.S. economy in Q1 grew at a 2.4% annualized rate, and China grew slightly more than expected in Q1 of 2019. Analysts were expecting a forecast of 6.3%. They put in numbers of 6.4% if you want to believe the numbers that are released by the Chinese government. Corporate news, Goldman Sachs says that its net income fell 20% during Q1 compared to a year ago. Netflix is having not a tough time, but it's going to start facing an increased amount of competition from Apple, Amazon, AT&T's, Warner Media, and Disney. They're all making major investments in streaming, while Netflix stock has gone up 30% in 2019. We have some news from IPOs this week. Pinterest started at $19 a share on Wednesday. They went up 28%. Ended the first IPO on Thursday at $24.40 a share. Lyft, on the other hand, went down about 28% I don't have the percentage here, but it started at 72%, and a lot of people are worried by the amount of debt that they have, very similar to Uber, for example. Unlike a lot of these other brand name tech firms, Zoom, which is the video conferencing company, they actually are making money. They came out with $36 a share in its IPO this week. Shares are up more than 72%, while it values the firm at $12.7 billion. And nearly 26 years after its first flight, one of India's biggest airline companies, I should say, called Jet Airways, announced that it was going to go ahead and close up shop due to the fact that they ran out of cash. So that's not a good sign, because India's aviation industry is growing quite a bit. In trade news, U.S. and China are looking to finalize trade talks, and European negotiators have been given the go-ahead to start negotiations with the U.S., even though they've been talking about putting in new tariffs in regards to the aviation dispute. EU is expected to unveil a list of U.S. goods that might be targeted for tariffs due to the fact that the U.S. government was giving subsidies to Boeing, or supposedly. There's basically a fight. If you guys know, Boeing is from the U.S., Airbus is from Europe. They're the two main airplane builders in the world. Well, if the government is giving Boeing subsidies, that means that they're producing products much cheaper, which is an unfair advantage to Airbus, even though I think now Airbus might have a little advantage since, you know, Boeing's airplanes are just falling out of the sky. So don't think it matters at this point. But EU's trade surplus in goods with the US increased in the first 2 months of 2019, while the deficit with China widened. The results may be increased global economic tensions, and the US trade deficit fell to an 8-month low with China in February, suggesting that Trump's America First agenda is beginning to work. U.S. International Trade Commission is stating that the North American Free Trade Pact is modestly boosting the U.S. economy, especially auto parts production, and it may curb vehicle assembly and limited customer choice. In technology, Asia and European cities are they want to link up a lot of their air travel network with their cities. There's a new jet being built in Japan, the first of its kind since 1960s, called the Mitsubishi Regional Jet. It's a 88 passenger jet from Japan that may help that demand and those plans. And investment news, there's a 486 electric vehicle manufacturers registered in China, 3 times the number that was registered 2 years ago. It's an $18 billion sales industry, and they're likely to hit a record of 1.6 million units this year. Still not enough business to allow all those companies to stay open, so that's going to significantly downsize. Hulu repurchases AT&T's 9.5% stake in the firm for $1.43 billion. Hulu's another streaming company. If you guys didn't know, it's 2/3 owned by Disney and 1/3 owned by Comcast. Apple is likely to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to secure games for its new arcade subscription service. It's reportedly paying millions of dollars per game to try to entice developers to stay on its platform. SpaceX is raising another $510 million. It was valued at $30.5 billion in December. Still no news as to what it's going to be valued now. And the Trump administration is going to allow lawsuits in the U.S. for the first time against foreign companies that use properties confiscated by the communist-ruled Cuba by Fidel Castro 6 decades ago. Investment banks are now earning more money from trading emerging market currencies than from the major G10 currencies due to the wild swings, for example, like the Turkish lira. And the European Parliament voted Wednesday to fine firms like Google, Facebook, and Twitter 4% of their overhaul, their turnover, if they don't fail to take down requests by authorities to take down extremist content. If they don't take it down by an hour, they're going to suggest those fines. It's a little bit exaggerated, guys, but in international events, U.S. and Turkey failed to break their impasse over Turkey's plans to deploy the Russian air defense system. Says it could jeopardize the U.S. fighter, including the Lockheed Martin F-35, which partly is manufactured in Turkey. Peru, or not in Turkey, but with Turkey obviously helped it build. Former President Alan Garcia from Peru died in Lima after he shot himself in the head because he didn't want to be arrested with the bribery probe from the Obradech, the huge scandal from the Brazilian construction firm. North Korea says it no longer wants to deal with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, saying that he should be more mature. They want him replaced with somebody else. After that, they announced its first weapons test since nuclear talks broke down. In unusual facts this week, I'm sure a lot of you guys heard about what happened to the cathedral in Notre Dame. There's a huge fire, partially destroyed. The roof and the tower collapsed. The fire supposedly started in the attic, and 3 of wealthiest families in France helped a fundraising drive of more than $1 billion. Billionaires behind the LVMH group, Kering and L'Oreal, pledged $565 million. U.S. congressional investigators are subpoenaing Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, Citibank, and Bank of America as Democrats try to continue to find Trump's financial records. Like, give it up, guys. Like, isn't it time to focus on more important things, like things that are affecting our economy and our country? Greek Parliament votes are launching a diplomatic campaign to try to have Germany pay billions of euros in damages from its occupation in the World War II. An issue German government is saying that it was settled years ago, and obviously Greece didn't really appreciate the fact that Germany gave them billions of euros in order to save them from financial collapse during the crisis a few years ago. No gratitude at all, huh, guys? And the final season premiere of Game of Thrones that I have never watched because I'm out there working while you guys are watching TV. Marked royal ratings for HBO, which is owned by AT&T, drawing 17.4 million viewers across platforms in first night numbers, 8% higher than the season 7 premiere 2 years ago. That's the news from this week, guys. Don't forget to leave all the questions with hashtag #AskMarcello. You can find the podcast on all platforms, iTunes, Spotify, everything, if you guys want to listen to it there. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Woo!